Welcome back to Media7, the Webstock special. It's often said that content is king, but the story of the web is just as much that of tools and applications that let us find and share that content. How are Google, Twitter and Facebook shaping our behaviour now? Or actually, does our behaviour shape them? I'm joined now by three men who have all had a role in creating our experience of the web. Former head of visual design at Google and now creative director at Twitter, Doug Bowman. The former technical chief of the Tumblr blogging platform and the founder of Instapaper, Marco Amont. And BBC refugee, former new product specialist at Yahoo and all-round web technologist, Tom Coates. Welcome to you all. Doug, let's start with Google. What was the role of design in Google's success? Because I think some people might look at it and think that there's not much design there at all.
Design is very much a key player and a key role in Google's strategy, but they very much prioritize speed and latency over anything aesthetic or visual in terms of what I was brought in to do. So it just ended up being not quite the right match in terms of what we were set up to do and the position that I was set up to. But their design is very much an important key strategy of what Google does, and it's very much about the function and the utility of everything that they create.
How much of it is about deciding how much complexity to hide and how much to expose? Because there are, if you start digging around in Google, there's an enormous amount there. And yet I assume it needs to be very simple and clean looking for the average user.
Yeah, I think that was one of the key strategies of Google from the very, very beginning. When you go all the way back to search and you think about the power of that simple text box and a button, they hide a lot of complex power behind that. And it's actually very powerful to type in any kind of syntax to get lots of different types of results back. And that was very much driven, I think, very early on from the command line based GUI interface, right? You can type in anything and get any number of results back. And it was very powerful just to have a simple text box. And it's actually very deceptively simple. So it works great for very novice users, and it works really well for advanced users as well, as long as they learn the syntax.
Now, of course, Google also owns Blogger and YouTube. Are the design philosophies, or were they when you were there, different with those applications? Because I imagine YouTube has to look much richer than a Google search page does.
Well, both of those came in obviously through acquisitions. So they already had their loyal fan bases and their loyal users. And design, I think, was approached differently for each of those products. I actually helped with some of the early design of Blogger as well, so I was familiar with the design aesthetic that they had created. And I don't think it was possible for them to for Google to completely assimilate them into Google's very utilitarian, utopian kind of world of function is king and it must be super fast. And so I think it's logical for both Blogger and YouTube to maintain their brand identities so that their fans aren't kind of alienated and the people that are really loyal to those brands don't feel like it's a completely foreign experience by the time they come to a product that might end up looking like a set of Google search results, which would not feel comfortable at all.
And of course then you went to Twitter, which has a completely different design aesthetic to Google. Even down to when something goes wrong, the user doesn't see an error code, the user sees the fail whale. How important do you think that was in making people love that platform?
I think whoever made that decision, that was a key kind of element in, like, it's really easy to hate an error message that says we're sorry for something, or something that says numbers of 404 or something like that. It's very difficult to hate this cute little whale that's being carried across the water by a bunch of birds. So even though people were seeing that repeatedly, often, especially in the early days of Twitter, where we had a lot of service problems and a lot of infrastructure and scalability problems, the fact that there was this kind of mascot of like, you know what, it's going to be okay eventually because we've got this cute little whale and he's eventually going to make it because the birds are helping him, get along. So I think that was kind of fundamental in kind of battling the perception that there were always these performance problems with Twitter, right? And there was this kind of this friendly mascot that was like behind the scenes, kind of letting you know it's all going to be okay because we've got it figured out, and it's just have a little bit of patience with us. And it was very much about not letting users hate us for when we were going down and when they couldn't either post their tweets or get their tweets.
Nice. You can't be angry at the whale. Marco, you're, like Doug, is someone who's helped create one big web success and then moved on to another one. The first one was Tumblr, which is a blogging platform, and you might think there are lots of those out there. And yet when you launched in 2007, something like 75,000 people switched over from whatever else they were blogging on straight away. What did you get right, do you think?
It was a combination of factors. One of the big decisions we made early on is that we weren't competing with the leaders at the time, which were movable type and WordPress. We instead made a whole different kind of product. We called these tumble logs. It was taking advantage of a burgeoning trend that was happening on the web, but it was very, very small. We made the first platform to make it easy to create these things, and they were kind of like blogs, and you could make one that resembled a blog, but it wasn't quite the same thing. And by letting go of a lot of that baggage that blogs had to have, and by redefining a lot of what it meant to publish online, and by making it a lot easier, we instantly attracted a lot of users.
It's super easy and friendly, isn't it?
That was always the idea, is to make it, to remove the barriers. Like, we didn't want to present you with 5 different text fields, title, tags, etc., just to post one sentence that you wanted to say right at that moment, or to share a picture that you just took. It was really about make it as easy as possible to post, and don't put so much complexity in front of the user that would confuse them.
Now, it's obvious that Tumblr has developed quite a culture of its own. Did you anticipate people doing what they did with it? I mean, for instance, the very strong focus on images.
Well, that's more of a natural internet tendency. Images are language agnostic most of the time. So the entire world can enjoy a really good looking picture. Whereas if you write a big blog post about the virtues of the new API decision that we just made, that'll appeal to a handful of English-speaking geeks. And so images will always be more pervasive on the internet, especially the kind of general appeal, things that just generally look good, or fast cars.
Did you anticipate that such a large proportion of those images would be hipster porn?
We do have... There are a lot of Tumblr users from Brooklyn.
With Instapaper, again, looking at the uses people make of it, I'm struck by the way people seem to prioritise different uses for it. I use it for instant bookmarking. Some people use it as a recommendation engine. Other people use it to save to their devices for later reading. What did you think it was when you kicked it off?
Primarily, it was just a reason for, I launched it for myself. I didn't even tell anyone about it for 3 weeks. I launched it so that I would have a way to read things I found at work during my commute on my iPhone. So the reading on your devices was a huge part of it, and that was by far the primary concern.
Tom, you are a veteran of 2 very large editorial organisations, the BBC and Yahoo.
Yes.
I kind of fancy that part of the job there was not just serving the individual, but also about moving around very large audiences. Was that the case?
Audiences, yes, or organisations?
Well, they're moving around large audiences, but it does seem that both of those have, their mass editorial projects.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends, really. I mean, the BBC certainly is an organisation that has been going through dramatic change over the last, few decades, and it's kind of fascinating watching how they react to that kind of level of change. When you look back at it, I mean, it's an organisation of 80 years standing that's gone through, one radio station to many radio stations to black and white television to 4 television stations to the World Service, and now has like 10 national UK TV stations, offshoot BBC branded TV stations around the World Service, 50 local radio stations, and the most trafficked website in Europe. So, I mean, they really are going through, they really changing.
Which is, again, a lot of big audiences. And yet, on the other hand, I get the impression that one of the smartest and most effective things Yahoo did was buy Flickr, which is a personal image sharing tool. Do you think that's significant? That it wasn't, some new editorial venture, it was, here's a tool?
It's a very tricky question. I think, I remember this from a really long time ago, Matt Howey, who runs a site called Metafilter, he kind of basically said, building things where other people come and work and do their own stuff is much easier than, writing it all yourself. It's just like, if you can bring a community together and everyone's creating something interesting and useful, then you can get kind of, like incredible amounts of interesting, fascinating stuff going on in the center. And really your role then is to sort of facilitate and enable that community to create. And, in exchange for that, you get some money out of it. Yeah. And I think that's actually extraordinarily positive and important shift in the way we think about things, that a large organization can go, our role is to surface and help people create interesting, imaginative, creative things.
And you guys are all, I know, keeping a very keen eye on how people use your products. I mean, I was fascinated in your talk, Doug, that you search for the phrase, I wish Twitter would, or I wish Twitter had. Is it important to know what's being done? Because how much effort goes into that?
Well, my search particularly is just monitoring the pulse of how people are using the product and what they're wanting, what their desires are, what their passions are. And Twitter is this phenomenal tool where we can kind of collectively monitor what people are saying, not only about other brands and products, but about our own product. And we get that feedback immediately after we make a change or if we do anything on the service. And to be able to push out or to collect and save custom searches like that and be able to check in on them every now and then gives us kind of a true pulse of what people are how they're really responding to our product.
Because I get the impression that everyone's doing this. Even Bitly, which is a URL shortener, which seems like a really simple, dull business, has a chief data scientist.
Well, no, as they should. I think there's a whole range of different things going on here. One of them is, if you look at Flickr and you look at the forums, you get this incredibly vocal minority of people who are sort of critiquing any change that happens. And that's very difficult to work with. When you've got a wider group of people to hear from, and you're picking it up from their actual actions, then you actually get real insight into how to fix and make and improve things. And it is difficult to kind of balance those two. Your very vocal minority who there is no designer who's ever built a web product that isn't familiar with the we don't like change syndrome from users. Like any change is considered bad. But Bitly, think about it. It's millions and millions and millions of links abbreviated down. Every time anyone clicks on them, they go through this intermediating service. There's endless data they can get out of that. Fascinating, amazingly useful and important data.
And we're going to have to come back to your ringing phrase, you can never have too much sweet, sweet data, even though that's ungrammatical. Now, Doug will stand down now and we'll come back after the break to look at where it's all heading with the news.